Good evening, and welcome to this week's episode of Wanderlust Wednesdays. My name is Joost Ouendag. Today I am joined by Leah da Silva, and we will be talking about the Bermuda Escape. This is Bermuda Week. If you've listened or if you watched on Monday, you saw William Curry, the head of an organization called BIOS that is concerned about the natural environment of Bermuda. Yesterday, you may have seen Christian Swan. Tomorrow, we will have singer-songwriter Heather Nova. And on Friday, we will have a woman who's known all over the island because of the beautiful perfumes that she creates. And today, we will just take you through the itinerary. And I will launch into it right away. We will start with a PowerPoint. And as usual, after that, you can ask any questions you have. And for that in particular, I'll have Leah join me after this presentation. So let's get right into it. The Bermuda Escape, a round trip from Hamilton to Hamilton, the capital of Bermuda, 8 days and 3 ports. Essentially, if you look at what the island itself looks like, it's a tiny little island. It's about 20 miles long, not a whole lot more than 2 miles wide at its widest point. There is a lot of water and there is a lot of land. If you look at the shoreline, the map that you have now here, you can see that the shoreline is actually very, very long. And that in and by itself gives Bermuda its signature beaches. Not all of them are pink, but a lot of them are pink. Around the island, and the island sits on a relatively shallow shelf, so the water around Bermuda is not all that deep. And in that water, you have some coral reef. You also have these tiny little one-celled animals that have tiny little shells around them. And these shells are, once the animals die and they wash ashore, those are what gives the sand its pink hue. Like I said, they're not all over the island, but they're in most places, and that's one of the things that Bermuda is known for. There's a lot more, obviously, and that's what we'll get into right now. So the best time to go to Bermuda is always a good question. Well, right now is the best time to go because here we are. It's one of our welcome back itineraries that gives you an opportunity to, not too far from the US, to travel and feel like you're cruising again, that you're in a country that has a little bit of exoticism. Bermuda really has this subtropical British mix that is quite unique, and it expresses itself through the Bermuda shorts, through a lot of colonial heritage in the architecture, and yet at the same time you have this beautiful, wonderful climate. Now, best time to go is probably on the edge of summer because it does get a little on the hot side in July, but I'm sure that if you live in the northern United States, that is actually a very welcome reprieve from winter, although right now, of course, in June, it gets hot on the northern plains as well. But it never gets all that unpleasant because you're always close to the water. And we've designed the itinerary in such a way that you actually have some sea time as well. And that is, if you will, a little trick. We sail relatively slowly. As I mentioned, a 21-mile island, we could zip around it a few times if we wanted to, but we made this a really good mix between port time and sea time because we know that when you rejoin us again, the ships are one of the reasons why guests travel with Viking, and we'll talk about a little bit about what you will do on the ship when we have a sea day. So the Bermuda Escape, in a nutshell, is 2 days in Hamilton, a sea day, 2 days in St. George, another sea day. This, by the way, is one of those beautiful pink sand beaches. And then after that extra sea day from St. George, you end up at the Royal Navy dockyards. And that's where you spend another day and a half, and then you get back into Hamilton. This is Hamilton itself. In Hamilton, you can walk the town. You can go on a guided walk, and you will see this church, the Most Holy Trinity Church. It's a neo-Gothic monument. It's one of the most impressive buildings, really, in Bermuda or in Hamilton. Hamilton is, if you will, the new capital. We get to St. George when we, a little later on in the presentation. St. George is the old capital. Hamilton is where a lot of the action today is. It's the biggest town on the island. And while Bermuda is relatively densely populated, altogether there are less than 70,000 people on the island. So it's not very big by any stretch of the imagination. A guided walking tour is one of the excursions we offer. From Hamilton, obviously, it's also a great idea to play some golf. And there are quite a few golf courses all over the island. We picked a few that we thought that you would really enjoy. In this case, Belmont Hills and Tucker's Point. And this is another thing that I need to mention. You will be able to access the things that Bermuda has to offer, whether it's underwater or on a beach or on a golf course. We will offer experiences from various different points on the island. As you can imagine, it being this small, you can really have a very broad offering of different things to do. And there will be a bit of an overlap from port to port, which is brilliant because there's enough of a slightly different angle, and Leah has done a really nice job in making sure that each port feels different and has a different look and offers a lot of different experience. And yet, when you travel around the island, you will be able to have all these experiences that you would like out of Bermuda. You'll be able to golf. You'll be able to go underwater. This is a perfect example. Out of Hamilton, we offer a glass bottom boat tour to get a sense of what the sea gardens look like. And this is a perfect image that shows you what you will find underwater. Barracudas, sergeant major fish, blue angelfish, parrotfish, pufferfish. It's really, as the name implies, it's a garden under the water. Glass bottom boat is really the best way to see it. But if you're a little bit more adventurous, we will also give you an opportunity to go snorkeling. And then after we have done Hamilton and we're now a little tired and the ship sails away from Hamilton, it is time for a dark and stormy rum. And this is a signature drink from the island. It was created in Bermuda and it was trademarked at the time by Goslin's Rum. And Goslin is a very important name on the island. They have been in the beverage business for decades. And originally you had to use their Black Seal rum in this cocktail and Barrett's ginger beer. Now Barrett's no longer is part of the overall family. That beer is no longer all that available, and so you can use any kind of ginger ale you want. And if you want to cheat a little bit, you can use any kind of dark rum, but you should really try to get Black Seal rum from Gosling's and have this signature drink. There's another drink that was, it is believed it was created on the island, and that's the rum swizzle. Rum, and that's what Bermuda shares with the Caribbean, although Bermuda, no, is not part of the Caribbean. It's way further north. But what it shares with the Caribbean is rum. At one point, because of the trade routes that connected Bermuda with the rest of the West Indies, sugar was very easy to come by. It was very easy to produce this, and it became part of what Bermuda was known for. And so the rum swizzle is a drink that it's believed that it was invented in the Swizzle Inn. And swizzle, of course, there's a tree that grows on the island. It's called the swizzle tree. And it's called the swizzle tree because twigs from this tree were used to stir drinks with. So the tree is called the swizzle stick tree. And you can actually go to the Bermudan National Museum and find one of the very first swizzle sticks. Either one of those drinks will give you a feeling that you are in Bermuda as you sail around and enjoy our sun deck, our pool, our spa, all those great public areas that make a Viking experience what it is. You know, as you can see in this image, there are tables out there. We still will offer al fresco dining more than most other cruise lines in the world, because it's just such an important part of the entire experience. We feel that this sense of being indoors yet being outdoors, lots of glass that moves away so that you can move back and forth from outside to inside. And that's an enormous part of the experience. So you'll have a day of that before you then land again in St. George's. And St. George's is where Bermuda began. And it was not an auspicious start. If you look at the Bermudan flag, this is the fortress. And the fortress is obviously was built by the British, became this really important stronghold. Every island between, I would say, between Europe and North America at some point was fought over by the French, the Spanish, and the British. And so you will find throughout the Caribbean, but also in Bermuda, you will find these ancient fortifications. The inauspicious beginnings that go back to those, very early in the 17th century, 1610, a ship that was on its way, imagine this, and look at a map maybe after my presentation, a ship on its way, a Virginia company ship on its way from Plymouth in Massachusetts, was blown completely off course because it was on its way to Jamestown, Virginia. It ended up more or less getting wrecked in Bermuda, and with what was left over of the ships, the troop under the leadership of a gentleman by the name of George Somers, and for a while these islands were known as the Somers Isles. They built some hovels that they could live in, and then eventually they built some smaller ships that brought them back to Virginia. And this is why the coat of arms of Bermuda has, and this is a little strange for an island that has where the maritime trade was so important for its history. If you look at the flag of Bermuda or the coat of arms, it's a shipwrecked ship, because that is how the island began. It was named, by the way, for a Spanish explorer, Juan Bermudez, and he saw that Bermuda was this series of islands. We think of Bermuda as one island, but it's really about 170, 180 tiny little islands with a few very big ones. He saw the island from a distance. He realized, as he was seeing pointy rocks sticking out of the water, that he should steer clear of it. So he just sailed by, and it was named after him. He never really landed there. So St. George is steeped in history. You will enjoy a walking tour in St. George, if you will. You will be able to see the National Museum, but also go to these spectacular caves, these underground caves. A lot of Bermuda is made out of limestone, and over thousands of years, limestone tends to, if you have water with a somewhat reasonable degree of acidity, that water, as it trickles through the soil, will eventually start to dissolve limestone, and you get these big gaping holes underground that eventually are turned into these phenomenal caves. They say that one of the first visitors to this cave, they were discovered in 1905 or 1907. You know this better than I do.
1907.
1907. So there were these two boys, very British story. They were playing cricket. One of them hit the ball very far away. It landed in a hole in the ground. They went to look for the ball and found this. So a very good, very amazing story of discovery. Today, you don't have to clamber in it like these boys did, and they were probably a little, it was foolishness of youth. It was a little dangerous, but these days there is a tunnel that takes you into these caves. One of the first visitors was Mark Twain, who loved Bermuda. At one point, he said, "You can go to heaven. I'll just stay in Bermuda." He really spent a lot of time here as a visitor, and he thought it was the best place on earth. And no, the story of Tom and Becky in the cave was not inspired by the discovery of this particular cave in Bermuda. It would be tempting to think so, but that was not the case. It was purely coincidental. Around St. George, and again, this is a recurring theme, you will be able to enjoy snorkeling, you will be able to enjoy beaches. This happens to be Tobacco Beach, and you can see all the way in the bottom left-hand side of the picture. This is actually not technically a pink sand beach. There's maybe a little bit of a hue, but it's not known as a pink sand beach. It's called Tobacco Beach because at one point, and these were probably seeds that came from Virginia, that were carelessly dropped there. They had tobacco growing here around the beach, and that's how it got its name. It's a great place in St. George to be a little inspired by the local cuisine. And naturally, as we always do, we will bring some of this on board. This is a dish, this is Bermuda rockfish. Not all that easy to get. Probably a little expensive because the rockfish is very carefully protected and you can't catch as much as you like. There are very serious limits. You don't have to stick with rockfish. You can also have a Bermuda fish chowder, which is more or less a national dish. And you can have something called Hopping John. Hopping John, again, it shows how Bermuda was connected to the rest of the Western Atlantic. It's a dish that contains Carolina peas and rice, and then all kinds of other beautiful things. And a papau casserole is a vegetarian casserole with a papau fruit, which also is something that is quite popular in Bermuda. So the cuisine is something to be savored. And of course, again, because of where Bermuda sits and because of the maritime trade, it's an island where you have dishes brought in from all over the world. After St. George, we again give you a little bit of a breather on board. You can use the spa. You can relax, find a quiet nook, a good book to read in our library on board. You can maybe attend one of the lectures that we have. There's an awful lot to do on the ship. Whether you want to be a little bit more active, we have a gym. You can go and do your rounds on the sun deck, or whether you want to keep it very quiet and on the down low. And obviously, with all the staterooms having verandas, you could just enjoy the scenery. You can just enjoy the blue skies and the blue waters from your own stateroom. And then the next and final port on this journey is King's Wharf. King's Wharf is where the dockyards are, the Royal Navy dockyards. And this is a view with the setting sun. It's a very impressive complex of buildings. From there, you can do all kinds of things. Again, in the neighborhood, you will be able to visit the dockyards themselves. This is also and I'll show you the slide. I'll move one forward because the building of the head of the dockyards was converted, and this is now the Bermuda National Museum. At one point, it was just a maritime museum, and as time wore on, more and more tens of thousands of artifacts chronicling the history of the island were all brought in here. And so this is where you want to go if you want to understand the history of Bermuda, all the way from its early beginnings with that inauspicious start in 1610 to the present day and everything in between. And then we'll show you just another picture because it's such a gorgeous sight on the promontory of the dockyards. From here, as I mentioned, there are a number of excursions that you can do. One of them, and Leah, I want you to talk about the railway by bike, that railway trail by bike later on. No, you know what? Can you talk a little bit about that now? Because that's just such a fascinating story.
The railway trail by bike started with the recuperation of the former rail tracks of the Bermuda Rail Company. The Bermuda Rail Company didn't have such a long or fortunate history, but it lived for about 20 years. It was built in 1937 in ways to quell the need for transportation from one side of the island to the other. Motorized vehicles had been banned in early 1900s. There was some fear that the arrival of motorized vehicles to Bermuda would detract the tourists looking for peace and rest. It proved to be that way, yes, but in the end, Bermuda did allow for motorized vehicles once they realized that the train would not be the way to go. Nowadays, motorized vehicles are still restricted on the island, and only one per inhabitant is allowed. And visitors to Bermuda are only allowed to rent electric cars. The tour that we offer from King's Wharf, it goes for, I don't want to lie, but I think it does a good 10-mile course on the stretch that starts from King's Wharf. And it just goes along the beautiful coastline. The guests will have opportunities to stop along the beaches, take beautiful pictures, and just enjoy the scenery that Bermuda gives.
Excellent. All right. So I think it's fair to say that we have a very good set of excursions that allow you to get a sense of the history, but also enjoy, if you will, the great outdoors. And by the way, we worked with BIOS, that company that I mentioned earlier. It's an environmental organization in Bermuda, and because we are doing this already with our new expedition cruising, we work a lot with organizations that are not maybe traditional, if you will, tourism partners. They're more, or travel partners. They are more environmental partners, if you will. And we have a number of excursions that really give you an up-close look of the natural environment in Bermuda. And then one more to mention from King's Wharf is one that takes care of your inner life, in this case, when it comes to imbibing another beverage that Bermuda has only recently became known for. This is in a microbrewery in King's Wharf, where you get a little bit of a tour of the brewery, and then of course you get a sampling of the beers of the Dockyard Brewing Company. And that is, after the dockyards, the ship will bring you back to Hamilton, and that is where this delightful week-long cruise ends. And we're looking forward to welcoming you on board. And now we're looking forward to getting any and all of your questions that you may have. So, Heather, do we have any questions?
Hi, Joost. Yeah, we've had lots of questions. So you can stop sharing your screen now, and I will start reading out the first one. So our first question comes from Diane in the United States, and she says almost all of the cruises for this summer are full. Will more cruises be available this fall or in spring of 2022?
We are, and I've mentioned this before, for the welcome back cruises, we're gauging how well they sell and how well they, and so far we've had one of the Bermuda cruises, and they've been very popular. They've been very well received. We're evaluating this to see if this is something that we want to continue. Obviously, these cruises came to us because we had to get very creative with the limitations that COVID brought to us. And so they're new to us as they're new to you. And obviously, if we have an opportunity, we will certainly add to our inventory. If it happens in 22, or maybe we skip a year and then do it in 23, I don't know yet.
Wonderful. Thank you, Joost. Now, we have a couple of questions from different guests who are in Canada, Bud and Bill, and they've written in to ask if this trip is available to Canadian citizens at the moment.
I believe soon, yes, they will. But we're still at a time where it is really important to understand the limitations that each country has when it comes to its visitors. And off the top of my head, I believe that the answer is not quite yet. But things are moving very quickly. So it's go to your travel agent or call us and find out what the current regulations are. As I mentioned, they do change. And I do believe that Canada is actually gradually starting to, and it quite often it's not so much can you go there, it's what happens when you come back. And I believe that Canada is now relaxing its quarantine measures. As it was even a few days ago, if you were to travel outside of Canada and come back, the quarantine regime was what discouraged a lot of people from going abroad, because I believe that the quarantine was 14 days.
Thank you, Joost. And just a couple of questions that have come in. I think perhaps we didn't quite explain at the beginning. A few people are just asking how they begin this cruise. So does it sail from a US port to Bermuda, or do you need to fly into the island?
You need to fly into the island.
Yes, lovely, thank you. And then Jackie in Phoenix is asking, how many flights a day will land in Bermuda? So is it well connected?
Yes, it's well connected. Because you're flying, you're not flying halfway around the world, which is really convenient because you leave in the afternoon and you arrive the next morning. You tend to arrive. You tend to fly relatively late at night if you're coming from the West Coast, and then you arrive early in the morning. But yeah, there's very decent connections. Yeah.
Wonderful, thank you. Also, lots of questions. We've got Carl, Sam, and Stephen, all in the United States. They're all asking about the current restrictions and whether they'll be able to explore the island on their own, or if they need to be part of an excursion.
You can explore the island on your own, and that is relatively recent. Any restrictions that we have are to keep you safe. It's really simple. We want you to explore as much as possible the way you always have. And Viking has always been obsessive about, we want you to go to places. Don't stay on the ship too much, because when you're in town, explore with all your senses. This is what we like to do. If and when we have any kind of restrictions, it's really just because we need you to be safe. We follow the regulations and guidelines from the CDC. We believe that currently in Bermuda, you can be out and about on your own. We strongly recommend that you wear face masks during that time.
Fantastic, thank you, Joost. Sandra in the United States says, what is the best excursion for a snorkeling trip in Bermuda?
That is a question for Leah.
Snorkeling in Bermuda can be done from all 3 ports that we visit, thanks to the famous coral reefs that made Bermuda the shipwreck capital of the world. So you can't really go wrong. If, or for the sake of duration of tours, I would suggest you take your tours out of either side from St. George's or King's Wharf, as they're closer into the outer banks. Hamilton is a little bit more secluded in the middle of the island, but all 3 locations have fabulous snorkeling opportunities.
Wonderful, thank you, Leah. Our next question comes from Ava in Washington, and she says, what is the current occupancy rate on the ship, and what is the current crew to guest ratio?
Current occupancy is roughly half, and because that's how we limit it, we will not increase until it's safe to do so. And that basically means that you have a very favorable, your crew to guest ratio is almost 1-on-1, because we need a relatively full complement of crew to make sure that we can offer the services as we normally would. So you will not miss out on anything that you would normally have on a Viking cruise.
Wonderful, thank you, Joost. Our next question comes from Janice in Tampa, and she asks, how long will the ship be docked in each port? And she also asks us if we'll be opening up any more space on the excursion to the church.
You have about 2 days in Hamilton. Correct me if I'm wrong, Leah. 2 days in Hamilton, 2 days in St. George, and then a day and a half or so. No, it's a day in dockyards, right?
Correct. We have embarkation day and then a full day for shore excursions and exploration in Hamilton, and followed by 2 full days in St. George and 1 long day in King's Wharf.
Okay.
Wonderful, thank you. Our next question comes from Tony in Upland in the United States, and he says, which ship is sailing around Bermuda and how old is this ship?
Our ships are not old. They're young. They're very young. This is the Viking Orion. And the Viking Orion was christened 2 years ago?
2019 or 18.
So it's a very young ship. It's a few years old.
Fantastic, thank you both. Richard in the United States says, can you recommend which beach to visit for a day trip, ideally not too far from the port by taxi?
Leah, do you have a good idea?
One of the most iconic beaches of Bermuda would have to be Horseshoe Beach, and that's easily accessible from Hamilton. It has the picture-perfect pink sand beaches, and it has quite a long extension of beach, so you're sure to find a spot, and it's easily accessible, as mentioned.
Wonderful, thank you. Freddie in Tumwater says, other than the famous shorts, what are typical Bermudan products to buy?
The perfume is you know, and again, you can see that on Friday, but that uses a lot of native plants. And other than that, there are certain foods that are typical of the islands, but that's more something that you enjoy there. Any souvenirs, Leah, that you can think of?
A good bottle of Gosling's rum.
Of course.
Always be good.
Of course, yes.
Fantastic, thank you both. Sandra in the United States says, what is the weather and humidity like in July and August?
It's a little warm. It can be a little humid, but I think you're never far from the water, so it never gets. I don't think it ever gets unbearable. What do you think, Leah?
From recent articles, though Bermuda does have a subtropical climate, the weather is very temperate, and I think the highest they have recorded in average doesn't go over 89. So that's quite bearable for the beauty that surrounds you in the island.
Thank you. Edward in the United States says, when we've cruised into and out of Bermuda previously, the ship had to take a zigzag course and avoided the small islands. Was this because there was shallow water, coral reefs and other geological features? And he asks, are all cruise ships now docking at the King's Wharf?
The answer about the zigzag is yes. So as I mentioned earlier, Bermuda is one of 4 volcanoes. And they're dead volcanoes, and these are by and large underwater. The only volcano left that is above water now forms all these little islands of Bermuda, and these 4 volcanoes sit on a relatively shallow area on a shelf in the Atlantic. So yes, it's with modern navigational methods, it's not difficult, but it used to be very, very tricky. And even today, the cruise ships have to maneuver a little bit. And the weather at the King's Wharf It's still a matter of how large the ship is. Our ships are relatively small for ocean cruise vessels, and that allows us to be relatively flexible in where we dock.
Thank you, Joost. And linked to that, we have a question from Theodore in Lake Oswego, and he says, during the sea days, how close to the island will you be? Will it be scenic sailing where we can see the islands and the coastline?
Yes, partially yes, especially early in the mornings when we start to depart, and then again when you get into port. There is probably some area midday where you will just have like a line at the horizon, but overall, yes. Yeah, you'll never be far away from the islands. They're not all that, they're not very tall anymore. 30 million years ago, the volcano was about 3,000 feet over the water level, but all of that is gone.
Thank you, Joost. Joanne in Dallas says, how much British influence is there still in Bermuda? I've seen some pictures of red phone boxes on the island.
There's a lot of it. There's a lot of it. Bermuda, to this very day, is part of the Commonwealth, and the head of state is Queen Elizabeth II. So yeah, it has a lot of autonomy, but it has a very definitive British flair.
Thank you. Barbara in the United States says, will passengers be guaranteed access to the Crystal Caves?
Leah, do we guarantee access, or do we just say there's enough space and we don't believe that we're going to run into issues?
We do have quite a good amount of space. Of course, being an attraction, it has restrictions on how many people are allowed to go inside for safety reasons as well, especially during these times. So far, we haven't run into capacity issues, but of course, it has restrictions. It hasn't been something that has constrained us yet.
Okay. All right.
Thank you. And just linked to that, Carl in the United States is saying many of the excursions on his cruise are showing us sold out. Will any more capacity be added?
Yes, because we want to make sure that you have things to do. Now, it's probably a good thing. We were relatively we were pleasantly surprised that we were allowed very recently to change the rules about being able to go out on your own. I believe that when we first opened the shore excursions for sale, there was no other option to get off the ship but with organized shore excursions. I would venture a guess that we'll see a little bit of a drop in, if you will, in shore excursion occupancy. So if there's something that you really have your mind set to, and I know that this is something that is a little bit inconvenient, but in this particular, given the unique circumstances, check out My Viking Journey every once in a while, and you will likely see that space is opening up. Just because people think, oh, well, I had booked so many shore excursions, I may want to take it easy one day and just stroll into town now that I can. So have a look.
Wonderful, thank you, Joost. Questions from James and also from Beatrice in the United States. They're both asking, what is the currency in Bermuda?
The dollar. They don't use the pound. That's one kind of odd thing about being part of the Commonwealth, but being so close to the U.S. It's their own currency, though. It's not the American dollar. It's a local currency. Very colorful. It's like all the bills are almost collector's items, I would say.
Fantastic, thank you. George in Greensboro says, is it possible to see a Bermuda sloop which has been rebuilt on any of the excursions?
I think you would need to go to the museum for that. Leah, do we offer anything using a sloop?
Not off the top of my head.
I think you'd have to go to the museum to see those.
Fantastic, thank you. Marie in Santa Fe says, will the Bermudan rum cocktails you mentioned be available on board the ship?
I would venture a guess, yes.
Excellent, thank you. Just a nice comment here from Noelle in Malibu. She says, love these educational lectures that Viking presents. Thank you for this so interesting history of Bermuda. It looks like paradise too.
You're very welcome.
Next question comes from Lester in the United States, and he says, does the ship dock in all ports or are any accessed by a tender?
Yeah, we dock everywhere, correct?
St. George is the tender port.
St. George, okay, sorry, yeah.
Thank you. Trevor in Blaine says, in your opinion, which are the best golf courses? I'd like to choose one with the best views. Thank you.
Leah, you pick the golf courses.
Well, we featured two, Belmont Hills and Tucker Point. Tucker Point is probably the most iconic golf course of the island, also the most renowned, and it has been featured in PGA tournaments. So if you're after the views and a very good golf course, then probably Tucker Point.
Excellent.
Thank you, Leah. Miki in Montclair says, years ago, I walked the railroad track, and can you still do this? And she says, the views are awesome.
I think you still can.
Yes, you can.
You now have to just be careful to not interfere with the bicyclist.
Thank you.
Share the road.
Julia in the United States says, is this cruise appropriate for older passengers with mobility issues?
Yeah, I think so, because you can, you know, it's a very slow-paced cruise, and you can really kind of, you know, given that you have a decent amount of time in each port, and you can do something very short and small, and you can do something that's a little longer. Yeah, I think so. Leah, do you disagree?
I do not. I do not. Bermuda lends itself to leisurely exploration. Hamilton, St. George's, Kingsworth, they're all very walkable, if you will. And there is so much to do within the vicinities of the ports. You don't really need to travel far to see something. You can actually see it from your ship as well. But once you go into town and explore, a lot of architecture, a lot of British remnants still in the island. And of course, the local flair, just talking with the local people, and that is a good experience to have.
Thank you, Leah. Doris in the United States says, how far is the airport from the port?
A hop, a skip, and a jump. Sort of right across the street almost. No, I mean, look, the island is 21 miles. And so you'll probably be hard pressed to find an airport closer to town, anywhere, maybe on some other smaller islands in the Caribbean, but it's very close.
Thank you. And then Victor in the United States just asks, can you tell us what the new boarding process is like?
Sure. So we will once you get out of the airport, we will bring you to the ship. We will take a saliva sample to do a test. Then we will bring you on the ship. We will show you to the muster station, and then you can relax in your stateroom. It takes somewhere between 4 and 5 hours to get the test results back. In that time, you are free to move around the ship, but you will need clearance to leave the ship. You know, you need basically your test needs to come back negative before you can leave the ship.
Perfect, thank you, Joost. Anne in Orlando says, is one side of the ship considered more advantageous?
Not really. Not really. You'll have a day where you think, oh, I should have been on the other side of the ship. and then the next day you'll like, oh no, I'm in the right side of the ship. I really don't think so. And the beauty of our ships is your public spaces are so generous that should you ever be, let's say you find yourself as you cruise along the coastline, you find yourself with your stateroom on the outside of the, you're looking towards the water and not towards the island. There's so many places where you can sit on a deck chair, enjoy the view from there, and it's not like we have an incredibly crowded promenade deck. There's space everywhere. There are seats everywhere where you can relax, where you can read a book, where you can have a drink. I don't think it's really worth spending too much time trying to figure it out. I don't see the need, really.
Thank you. Lee in Bethesda in the United States says, who are the lecturers on board?
I don't have names. What I can tell you is that these are people that partially, they're always experts. We look for people that have really good stories to tell. We had, and I'm trying to think of her name. I can't think of her name right now. We have a lady that lectures about the Bermuda Triangle, and it's a fascinating story. And she was very, very popular. So we try to bring people on board that have compelling stories to tell. We try, especially now with our welcome back cruises, because they're quite often so focused on smaller areas. So we try to bring local lecturers on the ship. We have someone that works for the Bermudan Visitors Bureau. So we have, I think, a really good mix of people that are not from the island but have studied Bermuda, and then people from the island itself.
Yes, absolutely. And just to add myself, one of those people is Christian Swan, who was on Viking.TV yesterday. So if anyone would like to watch his lecture, that's a little flavour of what you can see on board. Our next question comes from Zana in the United States. So she says, I visited Bermuda in July 2003, and I recall free shuttle buses. Do they still run? And she says, I also shopped in Hamilton in a lovely Wedgwood teapot shop. And she says that's a nice souvenir to get.
Okay, so that Wedgwood teapot or Wedgwood porcelain, we will. I'm just repeating this for everyone to hear, because not everyone, Leah, we need to remind ourselves of this. Not everyone wants to bring back rum. And the bus, the shuttles still run, I believe, no?
There is in Kingsworth, due to the distance to go the full dockyard. Hamilton, we're docked right in the middle of town, so there's really no need for shuttles. And St. George is the same. We're tendering into the middle of town. It's a small town. But the Royal Naval Dockyard does have a shuttle that does the course.
Yeah.
Fantastic, thank you. George and Rebecca in Cookville in the United States, they say, does Viking offer a cruise leaving from Fort Lauderdale and stopping in Bermuda, then sailing onward to Southampton in England? Do you plan to have such a cruise in the future? She says, I think it would be popular.
Who knows? We don't offer that at this time. And you know, in my mind, if you want to cross the Atlantic, I still think, but that's because I'm a Viking and I've been a Viking now for close to 19 years. We have this cruise from the East Atlantic, so from Europe across the North Atlantic, where you kind of follow the routes of the Vikings. And in my mind, you know, as long as we can do that, as long as we can take that route and follow the footsteps of the Vikings, I don't know that there's any Atlantic crossing that I would rather do than that one. But, you know, different cruise, different Wanderlust Wednesday.
Thank you both so much. I think that's all we've probably got time for tonight, but we do have one really lovely long comment which has come in. So I'll just read this out if it's okay. This is from Marjorie in the United States, and she says, We just returned yesterday from the first Bermuda Escape. It was fabulous and aptly named. The COVID protocols were excellent, easy to follow and non-intrusive. There is a great shopping area at the Docklands that has just reopened and a great variety of shops where you can purchase local items and souvenirs. My husband and I can highly recommend the catamaran snorkeling excursion. She says, I was worried about my lack of swimming ability, but we were provided with vests, noodles, flippers and masks. The glass bottom boats are great too. The crystal caves are even more beautiful than that picture. You'd never know the crew had been away from cruising for a year and a half. They didn't skip a beat. Thank you for this absolutely wonderful trip. We're ready to return to Bermuda with Viking.
Oh, thank you. That was nice.
Really nice. Thank you, Marjorie.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, that was all we had time for, Heather, I think, yes?
Yes, that's right. Thank you, Joost.
Thank you, everyone, for watching, and we'll see you soon on another Wanderlust Wednesdays. Thanks, Leah, for joining me tonight. Bye-bye, everyone.